Parents, what spooky past life memory did your kid utter? When my son was 3, he told his mom that he was a cosmonaut the last time he was a grown-up. Not an astronaut, the Russian version. We're 99% certain he hadn't heard the word before. When my daughter was 3 and starting to talk clearer, was talking to someone and concerned, I walked into the bedroom and no one was there. Initially I thought it was her playing with her toys. Days later the same scenario, but this time I asked who she was talking to and she replied, "Your grandma." I thought she meant my mom, who had recently passed, so I showed a pic of her and asked, "Is this her?" "No, your grandma," was the reply. I found a picture of my grandma and she with a big smile said, "Yes, her." I was shocked since I don't have pictures of my grandma displayed, and she dies 1991 and my daughter born 2015. When I was about 4, my family and I were moving house. We went to view this house in a rural village that was right by an airfield that had been very important during World War II, and there were still disused Anderson shelters in the garden and fields behind. Apparently, the minute I saw them I ran to my mom, clung to her arm and asked, "Are there going to be more bombs?" and got really agitated. Nobody ever spoke about the war, this was in the 90s, and we didn't even have a TV. My mom was really spooked by the whole thing. Nothing like having PTSD in the second life. In 2006, my best friend Nick was Kia in Iraq. We used to wrestle/fight until one of us submitted. These sessions would start randomly and always be initiated by showing your fangs. This involved pointing your pointer and middle finger down in front of your mouth while growling at the other person. A couple of weeks after his death, some family from the other side of the country that we only see every 5 years or so was visiting. My cousin's son, who was about 5 and who I never met prior to this visit, comes over. He gives me the fangs and smiles. I asked him, "Where did you learn that?" He says, "Your friend says hi," and runs away. I went to my room and cried for a bit. I believe it 100%, but I just wonder how that's possible. Seems like there's so much we're missing or blind to or just don't know. Thanks for sharing. Not exactly the same thing, but my 5-year-old daughter has been saying things like, "When I look in mirrors there are a lot of people in here, and why so many people in my room were last night?" For like 2 years. My daughter, when she was 3, used to talk about her imaginary friend all the time. Said he was big and fun, and spent a lot of time playing with her. One day I was scanning old photos and had a photo of my father on my desk, and she said, "Hey, how did you get a photo of my friend?" I instantly got shivers down my spine. My father died in the house, 15 years previously, and she played in a room that used to be his office. I cautiously asked her to tell me more about her friend, and without hesitating, she told me he talked funny. The chills stopped me dead in my tracks because Dad was an Aussie who never lost his accent. Obligatory, not the parent but the kid here. Apparently used to have rather frequent bouts of nightmares back when I was 4. And it always began with me screaming the name Sarah, then calling for help loudly, which would wake pretty much everyone in the house up, and ending with me just blubbering out, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," over and over and over again, all the while crying and sobbing. When I would wake up in the morning, I'd have no recollection about any of this. My parents had no idea what caused it, given that they knew no one named Sarah that I had interacted with. We had no TV, or anything of the sort. I hadn't begun going to preschool yet, and didn't know how to read beyond a few simple words. Nothing they did seemed able to stop it either. The whole thing went on for a good long while, almost a year, until one day, it just sort of stopped. Mom apparently tried asking me once about it, and Kid Me said something to the effect of, "Sarah doesn't want to see me crying anymore. So I won't." Didn't actually know any of this happened until some years back when I got to talking to my parents about how I always found the name Sarah to be beautiful. My daughter talks about her grandson all the time. I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then a couple nights ago she came out of her room at bedtime absolutely sobbing and said, "I'm sad because I miss my grandson. He lives in my old house in my old neighborhood." She has never lived anywhere other than this apartment. Edit, totally thought this would get buried. To answer some questions we have asked her about him, but it's pretty hit or miss on whether she'll actually answer or just think it's a fun game. The other night after some questions, she told us that he sleeps in a crib and has a white tongue. But when I asked her his name a few hours ago, she said Guga and laughed and laughed. It totally could be just her imagination, but she'd also told me some weird things about the baby I lost a few months ago, which really makes me wonder if she remembers/knows things we don't. I wonder if she would be able to describe the house and neighborhood at all. Wow, you should ask her what her grandson's name was. Not me, but a friend's little sister. The whole family was out for dinner at a restaurant in a skiing village which they recently bought a cottage near. My friend's little sister, as soon as they walked in, said, "I know this place. My mother and I used to paint here." To which her mother replied, "We've never been here before. What do you mean?" She replied with, "No. My mother from before. We used to paint here all the time." The family was obviously a little freaked out but didn't think much of it as she was pretty young and they figured just messing around. Later on though, when talking to the waitress, the little girl again adamantly mentioned how she used to paint there, and the waitress revealed that it in fact was an art studio for many years in the 1900s but had been converted sometime in the early 2000s into a restaurant. Needless to say, the entire table, waitress included, got goosebumps, and were at a loss for words. Maybe that other comment about the 100-year wait list might be a bit true. 100 years. I should search millionaires from Pennsylvania who died in 1888. As a kid I used to tell my mother, we were poor, that I had a basement in Pennsylvania with anything we ever needed. I don't know how old I was, but when I was young, under 6, I was in the car with my parents and I said something like, "Oh, I used to live there," while pointing at a house we were driving past. Turns out it was my great-great-grandmother's house. My grandma has a story from when my dad was 2 to 3 years old. He told her once that he was almost born before but was too sick and died and had to come back later. Turns out my grandma had at least one miscarriage before he was born that was likely due to birth defects caused by a medication she had been taking at the time. Anyone interested in this sort of thing should look up the World War II U.S. General George S. Patton. He allegedly attributes many of his victories throughout Europe to a familiarity with the battlefields, having fought on them countless times in past lives. I'm pretty sure there's a book about it. Edit, I found the book on Amazon. Web link. He came from a long line of men who died in battle. When he and his men were trapped by German troops, he charged into the German army saying it's time for another Patton to die. Many of the stories on here are family related, so it's possible. My daughter is deathly afraid of fire because the fire at school killed my sister, and my other mom was really sad. When she started preschool at 3, they had a fire drill, and she cried hysterically until it was over and she was convinced there was no fire. I had to go pick her up, and on the way home, she told me she's glad they have fire drills so not all of the kids die like at her last school. I'm still freaked out. I had a brother pass away from brain cancer. At the time, we had a cat who was a calico and just sort of knew he was battling something. She was really mean to most people, but with him, she was gentle. He would grab her paws and she would just let it happen. Well, about 3 years after he passed, my parents had another child. Another boy. He was about 3 when he told my parents about the white, brown, and black cat that used to let him grab her paws. She had died about a year before he was born. My son told my parents all about Coco and Boo Boo. Described the cats to them. He was 4. My cats, Coco and Boo Boo, had died 4 or 5 years before he was born. When my mom showed him various pictures of cats we had, he pointed them both out and told her Coco liked to knock things off the table. Coco had a nickname, Princess Knock It Off, because she would knock over anything she could. I didn't have any pictures of these cats myself, so he'd never seen them. I didn't talk to him about them either, because we had other cats now. Coco and Boo Boo were littermates and a bonded pair. Apparently when I was really little, around 3 or so, I told my mom that this was my last time here, that I wasn't going to come back. Better make this one count then. Browses Reddit for hours on end each day. Congratulations on obtaining enlightenment. I was driving my family across the state to visit family. Some commercial on the radio about Vegas came on and I started singing Viva Las Vegas in my best Elvis impersonation. My son was about 3 to 4 and he says I don't like Vegas. I lost my life and a lot of money there, His mom and I glanced at each other like WTF? He never said anything else about it. Imagine having a son who was dealing with the mafia in his past life, laughing out loud. You think it's all fun and games until Vinny Scammucci find out who your son is and come and breaks all y'all's knees. My little brother, when he was little, like 3 or 4, said that he was in the jungle saving animals, and one day he had to decide if he would stay with the animals or come live with us. He chose us, but reminded my mom that he couldn't stay forever. Just for a little while. He passed this last January at 26 years old. Edit. I appreciate the love. Everyone make sure to say what you need to those who need to hear it. I don't believe it's my place to tell the whole story, and I don't believe this is the forum. So I'll leave this as is. I also want to advocate for professional mental health for those who have experienced the loss of a child, sibling, parent, etc. Don't figure it all out alone. Go get help. Sorry for your loss. My mom said when I was pretty young she was driving me to daycare before work, and I told her, "You should have called Irma last night before she died." This was an old co-worker she loved. Turns out Irma had died that night. That's enough Reddit for today, I think. I have accumulated enough nightmare material. Right? Keep scrolling. Apparently, when I was a kid, my dad and I were watching Survivorman. Apparently it was an episode where he was in the woods, and I said something along the lines of "I got lost in the woods once with friends, but I was never found." I mean, hide and seek maybe. At this point, I'm kind of freak out bit can't stop, and I'm just going with the sunshine and rainbows options when I can. My son was 3 at the time. At bedtime, he said, "Mama, one time the bad guys got me and drove me in their car." And I said, "What?" And he continued to tell me a story about being locked in a room and he was hungry and I didn't find him. The bad guys got away and he never got out. That crap scared me so much I still get freaked by it. I held him so right that night. Jesus, that's creepy. I used to tell my mom that I could see a lady coming out of the wall and standing at the foot of my bed. I have no memory of this, but apparently my uncle and cousins on my mom's side used to see a lady at the foot of their beds as well when they were toddlers. When I was 3, I used to tell my mom stories about my other family every night before bed. The siblings I had and the dog too. One day she took me to Target and I told her I wanted big girl undies and she said she would buy them for me and I could wear them when I was potty trained. I told her that my other family already potty trained me so I can start wearing them now. I put them on that day and never had an accident after that. She never potty trained me and was just shocked. Would totally accept creepy story for someone else potty training my kid. I need to remember to have potty training pre-installed if I have any children. When my son was 4, we had driven past a cemetery. He asked me if I remembered when he died and was buried. I said no and asked him what he meant by saying that. He said he had died, was buried in a cemetery, and that's when he started growing in my belly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he said this. He doesn't remember say this. My middle son, 5, is named after my wife's grandfather. He just looked at her a couple of weeks ago and said, "I remember when you were little and you sat on my lap." He also once gazed into my mother-in-law's eyes, at 3 to 4 years old, stroked her cheek, and said, "My daughter." Imagine giving birth to your grandfather. Imagine not liking the people you keep getting reincarnated around. You guys, again? Edit. Funny side note. He flips out whenever we go to my wife's grandmother's apartment, smiley face. My son said once, "Mommy, when I was big and you were little, I remember when we danced in the kitchen." The only person I ever danced in a kitchen with as a child was my grandfather. Comforting and yet creepy at the same time. I used to watch my nephew when he was about 3 or 4. One day he was at my house and pointed to a magnet of Arizona. It had a picture of the desert with rock formations. Kid pointed at it and asked where it was. He said he used to live by red rocks like that with his first family who all had straight, dark hair. His is blonde and curly. Now, And that he had a mom and a dad and he had had a brother until he went too far into the desert too close to dark and got eaten by not dogs, not wolves but smaller. I said coyotes. And he kind of mouthed the word and said, "Oh, that's what you call them." Then he was sad and didn't want to talk about it anymore, so we had lunch and that was the first and last time he mentioned it. As soon as I could talk, about 2, I would tell my parents about my moon family and how I had lived with them until I said a bad word and got sent to Earth and landed in a bush where my mom made a salad from the leaves, and that's how she had me. I would make my mom so mad by telling her she was doing stuff differently than my moon mama. Edit. Thank you guys so much for telling me all about the different folklores and stories that reminds you of my silly little story. I can't wait to learn more about Princess Kaguya, and a few others mentioned. I'm not sure about past lives, but I have to wonder if the collective unconscious might be something to look into. Didn't believe in ghosts and crap until this day, but it's fair to say that now I have a slightly more open mind. Our 2/3-year-old daughter was playing on her own, but like she was playing hide and seek with an imaginary friend. Asked, "Are you playing hide and seek?" She said yes. "Who are you playing with?" "Uncle Andrew." My wife's brother Andrew was 7 when he drowned when my wife was 5. Didn't like to talk about it, so we never mentioned it. My cousin's kid was jumping on the bed and had her hands out like she was holding on to something. When asked what she was doing, she said playing with Grandpa. Cousin asked, "Who's Grandpa?" "Yours, Mommy." When asked what he looked like, she described him to a T, and jumping on the bed was such a grandpa thing to do. He had died when she was 5 months old, and my grandma died before she was born. Couple days later, they were at my mom's, and my mom had a picture of her parents. She walked up, dragging her brother with her, and said, "Look, Jay, that's Grandma and Grandpa. Remember? They play with us sometimes." In a weird, creepy sort of way, that's very sweet. My grandparents were not overly nice people, so I missed out on that part of my life. Hearing about grandparents playing with their grandkids, even under the circumstance you mentioned, makes me happy, because even though they may be gone, your cousin's kids are still getting to have that moment. My grandma raised me. My mom was a single mom for a while, so Grandma was my babysitter. When she died, we had been sharing a bedroom. She was more mom than my mom ever was. Was watching an old video of a jazz drummer playing a solo. No idea who it was, but he was really good. My daughter, probably age 3, was looking over my shoulder for a minute before she said, "I used to play the drums like that when I was a man." Edit. When I got up this morning, this had blown up. Thanks for the awards and hilarious comments. My daughter is the one who deserves an award, so I will pass it on. Unfortunately, she no longer has any recollection of making that statement or playing drums. But she is a very musical person, and I'm hoping she stays that way. You should get her some sticks. Right, let's see if Buddy Rich still got it. I laughed way too hard at this, thank you. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.